Alright, here I am about to give you the promised flip through of my altered book, my art journal, and I started it back in 2016, and the pages are not in chronological order, and this being the cover was actually the last thing I did. It was the first thing, and then I started with collages. You may be able to see some of the collage element bumps underneath the texture, and the cover had lots of faces over the course of the couple of years, but I'm happy with how she's finished off. So here we go. It was really a place for me to experiment and feel very, very comfortable and not feeling pressured. So this is one of the early ones in 2016 on music paper that was then glued in. I want to see what effect inks had over the top of excuse me, sorry, things like the matte gel that I put down. I also textured it with gesso, so just playing with what do inks and other materials do on this kind of paper and over this kind of product. Underneath here was a very textured piece of artwork, and it was the challenge that I'd seen online was to work with colours that you didn't like. So I had reds and greens and real Christmassy colours, and of course didn't like it, and eventually some faces emerged over the top of that, the underpainting. This lady's probably one of my favourites. She was really, really easy to paint. She just came forward, and I've alternated between white gesso and clear gesso, and also I've used some pastels along with inks and acrylics, so she's a whole mix. And this one was back in 2016, where I had my first attempt at following a Beagoni lesson, and I'm sure you can see that it looks nothing like one of her pieces. Playing with a Tamara Lepore style, working with inks and flowers and adding doodled elements, and I really like the fact that you can see parts of the story coming through. The story underneath of here was actually Puss in Boots. And this one was drawn back in 2016, and I clear gessoed the page and then just worked with charcoal over the top, and I absolutely love how the images come forward. It's like she's telling a story. The inspiration for the eyes on this piece was Susie Platt. She does gorgeous artwork, and you can really pick a Susie Platt piece because they have these really oversized, large, gorgeous eyes. So I tried to capture a little bit of that look in this one. Again, playing with brayering, a poor quality fluid fluoro colours over the page, and what would happen, and I don't know if you can see the texture there. Then I played with Neocolor 2s in the eyes, charcoal for the rest, and the charcoal responds completely differently over the plastic consistency of the fluoro paints, so that was interesting. This one was a whole hodgepodge of collage and stenciling and homemade stamping, acrylic paints, charcoals, and me exploring a different face angle. I was working with Jane Davenport's inks, and loving how vibrant they are. And the page initially had stencils. I actually cleaned off my stencil underneath here, and so that the inks and colours that were already on the stencil are what transferred onto the initial page. And then I worked with the Jane Davenport inks, and she's been sketched out in charcoal. The fun of working in an altered book is that there's no pressure. It doesn't matter if proportions are not correct, or it's just a really, really safe place to play. And on this page I was experimenting with collage elements and also with the effect of masking tape underneath inks. So this one was done in 2018. Here's an early one, and I put inks down on the page, stenciled, and then gessoed, and the gessos left texture. And then I worked with, I've actually got one here, Dilutions paints, but the ones, they're a little bit thicker, and they're great for stencils. So I worked with those, and then inks over the top, and also oil pastels. Little bit of fun mixing my love of cows with I don't know, someone who looks more like a fairy or a mermaid. Lots and lots of inks. You can see gesso put on quite wildly, and I really like her eyes in this one. Sometimes this book actually became a little bit like a prayer journal, and the words that came to me while I worked on this piece were dream, climb, look up, listen and pray. Might not mean anything to you, but for me each of those words is a motive. Sometimes the book reflected the page underneath. This was Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Really don't like her, quite like the bears, but she's there to stay. I was playing with turning animals into people. So I have a puppy dog, I also have a reindeer, and I have a mouse. This unfinished piece will remain unfinished because I started it just before midnight on December 31st, 2018, and that's as far as I got when we flipped over into 2019. So there's a few different faces, and I'll always remember seeing in the new year. This piece was done really early on, before I'd made the decision that I was going to do faces through the whole book. My son bought a new pair of shoes from Adidas, and the tissue paper wrapping around the shoes actually had faces in it. So I took the opportunity of tearing up the tissue paper and turning each of the flowers into something that had a face. Here's the last page within the book, and because it was on the cover I used lots and lots of heavy textured paste because it could hold it. And again, it was almost like a prayer time when I was working on this, and a scripture came to mind, Isaiah 40:31, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. So I hope today you're able to renew your strength. Thank you for being with me and seeing my flip through.